We're going to pick up about verse 7. So as we go through the context of this, the overall context, 1 Peter is suffering, and to do it in a godly way. There is some suffering that we go through that is our own fault, but there's a lot of suffering that happens on this planet, not because you did anything wrong, but simply because we live in a world that is all wrong. And our goal is to do it in a faithful way as Christians that glorifies God. So in verse 7, he says, "The end of all things is near, therefore be of sound judgment and sober spirit for the purpose of prayer." So if you look at verse 7, there is a statement made there that says our prayers, really what he's saying is, if you're going to pray as you ought to, you're going to need sound judgment and a sober spirit. Our prayers require that to be as effective as possible. Those are not two things that we typically think of in terms of prayer, sound judgment and sober spirit, but I will ask the question, why? Why might that be the case, where sound judgment and sober spirit would be something that would affect your prayers? We could sit here quietly. Yeah. Okay, so one reason would just simply being, so your mind is clear to pray for the right kinds of things. We do know that there are things that God would not have us pray for, or it's certainly an attitude of greed that we're praying purely thinking for ourselves. Any other reason sound judgment or sober spirit might affect your prayer? Yeah. It's an excellent way to put it, just to think of it in terms of a conversation, the way that we talk with anybody. So I remember one time we had a drunk wander into services, and I had to talk to him. And, it was not the deepest conversation I've ever had in life, right? So sober spirit, that idea of thinking clearly and thinking about what you're going to say. If you're going to have a conversation with somebody, that matters. So that's a great point, just to think of it in terms of you wouldn't have a conversation with somebody else without thinking about what you would say and how you would say it, and prayer is a conversation with God. Yeah. Anybody have anything else? Yeah. Yeah, so just the respect issue, right, is you're not having a conversation with just anybody. If you were to have I know this analogy gets used a lot, but if you were to have a chance to have a conversation with the president or somebody, high up, important, you'd probably think about what you were going to say first, right? A friend of mine had a chance to meet Ronald Reagan one time, and they did one of those receiving line things where Reagan was going by and shaking everybody's hand, and he rehearsed for days in his mind what he was going to say, because he's going to have like 3 seconds, and then he shook his hand and he goes, "Ah," and then the president moved on. So I didn't even say anything at all. But yeah, you're showing respect and reverence for your Creator. Yeah. Anybody have anything else they'd add to that? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I agree, and you're right. We're trying to affect the decision-making of our Creator, so yeah, come thoughtfully. And then I agree with you. There's a gentleman that I knew years ago. He would write out word for word. Whenever he was going to lead a public prayer, he would write out word for word. And it is funny, there were some people who kind of looked down on that. I always felt the exact opposite. I felt like he was entering in to that role and taking it so seriously that he wanted to make sure he said everything right. So yeah, so you can kind of see how these are things that make a major impact in our prayers. And so it's like anything else, preparation, thoughtfulness, they go a long way. Then in verse 8, he says, above all, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love covers a multitude of sins. And so here is a statement that we talk about, but don't necessarily always talk about the mechanics of it. Love covers a multitude of sins. Let me start by saying what this doesn't mean. Can you love somebody enough that you can remove their sins? No. So if they don't want to do the right thing and they continue to do the wrong thing, I can't love them out of that, right? So that's not what it means. But when he says, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love covers a multitude of sins, what is another way in which you can cover or blot out sins? You can do it through the blood of Jesus, right? So that's the number one, right? So we know Jesus' love covered a multitude of sins. How did it do that? What? Through action. So he made an action that said, I know you committed this sin, but I'm going to make a sacrifice in order so you don't have to pay the cost of it. Is that a fair representation of what Jesus did? So can we, in a smaller way, emulate that? Meaning, can we make sacrifices in our love, if we have fervent love for other people, that will diminish the consequences of sin? I think we can. And let me give you an example of it. Imagine you are in a disagreement with somebody, and they raise their tone a bit. You know, they get that, that tone of disrespect or unkindness, and they get a little edgy on you. And it was wrong for them to do so. You have two choices at that point. They have upped the ante, so one option for you is to up the ante too, right? And we escalate. We continue to escalate the situation, and it gets worse and worse and worse until, if you follow it to the furthest degree and nobody backs down, the relationship just ends. Or you have another option, which is to show love to the person, and even though they've escalated the situation, you choose to de-escalate it. And when you choose to de-escalate that situation, what you've done is you've covered that sin. In other words, you didn't make it worse. You didn't make the situation continue to propel out of hand. That's one way I think that we can cover a multitude of sins. Another is, if somebody's going down the wrong path, and we reach out with love for them, right? You see me, and I'm starting to live a way that's not right with God, but instead of just letting me go off course, you pull alongside me. You can help me so that the path that I was on, I don't stay on. So there's a whole bunch of sins that I was going to commit if just left to my own devices without the love of others, but you pulled alongside me, you helped me alter that course. Now, you can't do it if I don't want it, right? But you help me, if I do want it, you help me to get back on the right course. And so you could say there's 10,000 sins out there Scott was going to commit, but because you pulled alongside, you covered that up. Does that make sense? We have the ability as fellow Christians to help each other be better and avoid a lot of problems. That's one of the reasons that the Lord has designed it so that we work together, is that we're each strengthened by what every joint supplies. in our love for each other, just realize you can make the difference in somebody else's life. You can make an impact. Then verse 9, be hospitable to one another without complaint. So don't complain about hospitality. Why might somebody complain about hospitality? I hear it's work. I hear something else. Somebody said work. I missed the other one. Time. Yep, time. Scott, did you have something back there? What? Time. Okay. So it takes work. It takes time. Anything else? Okay. It's a valid point, right? Some people you have over there enjoy, other people are me. So, it just depends. The fact that none of you laughed at that is a little hard on my self-esteem, just saying. Like, there was supposed to be a little chuckle, and then we all laugh. Haha, that's not true. We all love you, Scott. No, it does. It depends on the person. It depends on where they're at life. Some people are easy to get along with. Some people not so much. Anything else? So you get the idea, right? But how many of us enjoy the benefits of hospitality? Right? We all like it when others are hospitable to us. Everybody likes it when they feel that others care for their needs, watch out for them, invite them to be a part. Hospitality, I might mention, includes more than just having people over to your home. You can be hospitable and not even have a home. It's a matter of taking care of the needs of other people. If you've ever heard the saying, he'd give you the shirt off his own back, that's another way of saying being hospitable. He's somebody who would take care of, if I've got it and you need it, I'd help. So, but that takes work, it takes time, and sometimes you show hospitality to people and they're not grateful. That's another aspect, right? Have you ever done a nice deed for somebody and they didn't appreciate it? So there's lots of reasons we can tell ourselves, I'm not going to do this anymore, but we don't want to live in a world in which nobody does it. And so it always begins with me, right? I can't do anything about anybody else. You can't do anything about anybody else, but we have to make a decision for ourselves that this is who we are. Think of some examples. Can anybody think of any examples of where hospitality made a huge difference in the Bible? What? The Good Samaritan. There you go. You take the Good Samaritan, if that guy had not stopped, that guy was beaten and left for half dead, and how many sermons have been preached because of that example, right? Any others? Yeah, the Shunammite woman. Yeah, so you look at these people who have, throughout the Bible, taken care of other people that needed it when nobody else did. And they are the bedrock for Christian virtue, aren't they? We need to understand that as we live our lives too. Anybody have anything else on that? Yeah. Right, and it's a good point too. We try and break verses down so we talk about it, but they don't happen in a vacuum. The verse on having fervent love is right next to hospitality for a reason, and I agree that those two do go together. And part of love is recognizing that everybody's on their own journey, right? And I can think of days where I did not behave as I ought to, and had nothing to do with the people I did it towards. It just had to do with where I was at. So yeah, I think that's a great point. Okay, and then in verse 10, he's going to move forward into this idea of talking about our various gifts. So in verse 10, he says, As each one has received a special gift, employ it in serving one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. Manifold is a word that just means various. And so here he's really talking about the fact that people have various abilities, various talents, various gifts, and that's all from God. Right? So you have God, and we go to like the parable of the talents. Who gives everybody the talents? The 5 talents, the 2 talents, the 1 talent. Where'd they get that from? It was given to them by the master, right? Given to them by the king before he heads off on a journey. Given to them by their master before he heads out. That is us. We all have various talents and gifts. But each of us has whatever gift we have, we've got to employ it in serving in whatever capacity we can. I might also add to that, if you go back to the parable of talents, the people who had talents and used them, what did they end up with? What did they get? More, more talents, right? If you use what God gives you, you will find that you have more to use as time goes on. If you want to get better at anything, at some point you got to do it. I fear in many respects that's one of the things that gets us into trouble with evangelism. We talk about it a lot. We talk about fishing, but nobody ever goes to the water hole, right? And then we wonder why I'm not getting better at it. At some point, you just got to start talking to people. And I might mention, when you start talking to people, you're not going to say the right things. You're going to fall flat on your face. They're going to ask you a question. You're not going to have an answer to it. You're going to say it wrong, or you're going to say something and then walk away 10 minutes later and go, oh, what I should have said was, oh, that's okay. That's part of that process, because next time that comes up, you can go, I know. Now I remember what I should have said, right? You learn. That's true in everything you do. And but we have to understand that these things that have been given to us, they've been meant to be employed in the service of God. So what are some gifts and talents that God gives people that we should be using? What? Public speaking. Okay, so that's one. Yep, and in fact, he'll talk about that a little bit more as we progress a couple of verses down, specifically that one. But yeah, public speaking. If you can speak in public, you should be prepared to do it. Hospitality. Yeah, hospitality. So if you have hospitality, a lot of times we associate with a home, but as we said, it could be something else. In the case of the Good Samaritan, we don't know whether the guy had a home or not. I'm guessing he probably did, but did he help that guy by taking him to his house? Oh, where did he take him? He took him to an inn, right? So you can help somebody even if he's like, I've got a 1-bedroom apartment. I can't have a whole bunch of people over. You could organize something, couldn't you? You say, hey, we're going to all meet at a park. Or we're going to have a get-together. You could probably even pair with somebody who had a big house who doesn't want to organize it and say, can we use your space, but I'll make it happen? You could tell people, hey, we're going to meet at a coffee shop and just read through the Bible in a year. There's lots of ways you could do that. Any other things that we could be doing? Yes? It's a great point. Some people just have a personality that is easy to get along with, don't they? And that you can use that to just kind of make your way through life and just use it for your own benefit, or you can use it in the service of the Lord. Yeah. Other people have personalities that are really quick to, they're more bold, right? They'll be the one to start the conversation, and they have that ability. So yeah, your personality, whatever it is a gift. Anything else? Okay, so then from there we move down to verse 11, and this gets back to what Todd mentioned, public speaking. If you can speak in public, here's a specific to you. He says, whoever speaks is to do so as one who is speaking the utterance of God. Older translations will say one should speak as the oracles of God. I would put it this way, that when we speak, our speech should be like the prophets. Meaning, when we speak specifically about spiritual things, nobody cares about your opinion. That's not what matters. What matters is leading people to the text, right? So this is something that gets brought up with preachers, and rightfully so all the time. Preachers have opinions like anybody else. We have opinions on how to vote. We have opinions on how to dress or run your families, all sorts of things that have nothing to do specifically with the Bible. And it's real easy to get off in the weeds on your opinion on something. But if I spend 50% of my time talking about Scott Beyer's opinion on stuff, what have I not been doing? We haven't been talking about the Bible. We haven't been going to the Scripture. Right? We want to be people of the book, which means we need to look at what the book actually says and lead people to the text. It is so much more comfortable for us to stay away from the text, because then we get to talk about either what we like to talk about. Preachers do that too. We get our hobby horses. We like certain topics, and then we just kind of fixate on that topic. But Paul said that he didn't shirk from declaring the whole counsel of God. Right? So there were parts of the text, parts of the will of God that maybe weren't Paul's favorite to talk about, but he talked about them anyways. You have to talk about the whole counsel. The sum of thy word is truth. So whatever we say in terms of spiritual things, we need to go to the text. And I might mention that in one sense, all of us are preachers. Because in our private lives, as we're dealing with our friends and neighbors, they don't need to hear your opinion on religion. They need to hear something you can anchor in the text. They need to know this is what the verse says. And that way, if they argue with you about it, what can you say? If what you're saying is only based off of book, chapter, and verse, and somebody says, well, I don't like that, don't judge me. If it's anchored in the text, what can you tell them? You go, it's not my opinion. That's what you say. Look, it's between you and God, but here, let's just look at that verse, and you decide what that says. Because it's there. It's in black and white. But if we get off in the weeds of opinion on stuff, we're dancing in a realm that we don't have a leg to stand on. So these are all really important ideas in terms of us. I mean, you think about how much of your life is controlled by what you say. Your tongue is a world of iniquity if you're not careful. So let our speech be like the prophets. Right? When we're going to talk about God, let's show that reverence that we talked about with prayer. Let's show it in the way that we talk about Him too. Okay. Then from there, let's skip on down to verse 12. There are more things there in verse 11. I'm for the sake of time, I'm going to dodge a little bit. But in verse 12 it says, Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal among you which comes upon you for your testing, as though some strange thing were happening to you. But to the degree that you share the sufferings of Christ, keep on rejoicing, so that also at the revelation of His glory you may rejoice with exultation. If you are reviled for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. Make sure that none of you suffers as a murderer or thief or evildoer or a troublesome meddler. But if anyone suffers as a Christian, he is not to be ashamed, but is to glorify God in this name. For it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God. If it begins with us first, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? Okay, so in this section, he lists a variety of different things in dealing with fiery ordeals. And the first one is, don't be surprised. So before we talk about not being surprised, let's back up for a second. What's a fiery ordeal? Or dial it even more, what's an ordeal? It's a difficulty. So if it's a fiery difficulty, what does that make it? Really difficult. That's all we're saying, right? So we're just saying there's a difficulty, but now it's a big difficulty, right? There's that meme that goes around of the cartoon character in the house on fire. He goes, it's fine, everything's fine, right? It's a fiery ordeal, right? That's the idea, is when you face really difficult things, number one, don't be surprised. Why shouldn't you be surprised? He's told us it was coming. That's one reason. He told us it was coming. So when God says this is on its way, don't be shocked at it. What would be another reason you wouldn't want to be surprised? Yep. So if we're emulating him and preaching him, we should expect to be treated the way they treated him. So that we should expect pushback and resistance. So there's another. So one, we're told. Another is just simply that Jesus, if we're going to emulate him, it happened to him. Any other reason anybody can think of? I can think of one more. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, so now you're not really even getting to the why not be surprised in the sense of, hey, these things have been told to us, but the reaction is different. Yeah, when you're prepared for something, you react absolutely differently, which is why people like police officers do so much training, right? Because they're going to face situations that would be very surprising for the rest of us, but they need to just go, I know exactly how this goes. I know exactly how to handle this. I've faced this in drills 1,000 times. So, yeah, surprise means that you're going to react in a sudden and shocking way. So that's a great point. Anything else? Yeah. Okay, so we know there's an enemy out there. It is not just a matter of us living our lives. There's an opponent that we're dealing with. And we have to be aware of that. Yes? Good point. Yeah, so if we are avoiding things because it might potentially surprise us with trouble, there's a lot of things we should be doing that we end up not doing. Yeah, that's a great point. The second thing that he says is, which comes upon you for your testing, as though some strange thing were happening to you. So don't be surprised, because one of the reasons it comes upon you is for your testing. And this isn't strange. What's something that, when we say something strange, what are we saying? What does that mean? Oh, that's strange. What does that mean? It's out of the ordinary. Yeah, it means this isn't something we see every day. Is it something we don't see every day for godly people to suffer for God? Or is that a common theme in the Bible? Right? So it's throughout the Scriptures, isn't it? The righteous people of God, from Genesis all the way to Revelation, have faced suffering. So this isn't strange. Don't think you're any different than those who've gone before you. And he ties it, don't be surprised, don't think it's strange, it's coming for your testing. So testing, this is one way I like to think of it, is that if you take a test and you had God watching you take the test and you had Satan watching you take the test, Satan watches you taking the test, and what does Satan want the outcome to be? He's waiting for you to fail, right? There's another one he got wrong. God watches you take a test, and what's he want to see? He's looking for your success, right? He finds no joy in failure. He wants you to grow, to succeed, to become who you meant to be. God is constantly disciplining us for our good, right? And all discipline for the time is not enjoyable, but the reason a godly parent disciplines their child is because they want their child to be successful, not because they want them to fail. So here we face tests in life, and Satan wants you to fail that test. He would love for you to be surprised and go, this isn't fair, I can't believe this is happening to me, and throw a little pity party. God, on the other hand, says, don't be surprised, this is coming, this is part of the deal, it's part of serving me, and you're going to grow from it. So that idea of God wanting you to succeed in things. The third thing he brings up is that when you're going through this, to the degree that you go through it, you share the sufferings of Christ. So there's a third thing we need to remember about fiery ordeals. You're sharing in the sufferings of Christ. What was the outcome of the sufferings of Christ? Salvation, redemption. What was the last one? Reconciliation. Salvation, redemption, reconciliation. That'll preach. These details of your life being so much better, glorification of God, all of that happened through Jesus' suffering. And you get to be a part of that. Now, you know the end of the story, right? We're not looking, we see the empty tomb. We know the other side of the story. We know how it turns out. And now you as a Christian are being welcomed in and said, you can have fellowship with Christ. You can be a part of that story, of the suffering through the ages that brings about the redemption, the reconciliation, the salvation, the glorification of God. That's a powerful statement, isn't it? I mean, that's quite the privilege. So what we're being given is an opportunity to be a part of something much larger than ourselves. And how many people go through life wanting that? I want to be part of something bigger than myself. It's part of that human yearning, I think. And so here you're being allowed to be a part of that. It's no small thing to have fellowship with Christ in that suffering. When you go through hard things, but you do it faithfully, you are continuing that suffering of Christ for the redemption of people. Paul said that of his own life, that he would fill up in him what was lacking in the sufferings of Christ. And that's an awfully bold statement that Paul made when he said that. He's not saying Jesus didn't suffer enough. He's saying there's more work to be done. And Christ intended us to do that work. Next one is then he says, keep on rejoicing, so that the revelation of his glory you may rejoice with exultation. There's a difference between rejoicing and happy. Anybody want to define the difference between being happy and being joyous for me? That's a good way to put it. Happy's in the moment, right? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yep, I would agree with that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a really good way to put it when you go to Hebrews 12 especially and you look at that. We all know Jesus wasn't happy on the cross. Nobody looked up at that cross and said, there's a happy guy. But the scripture does say he had joy, the joy that's set before him. So you do have those pieces. Yeah. Right. Yep. No. Yeah. So I would put it this way because I think it's an interesting way to look at it. Jesus already says, look, you're going to get a passing grade. All I ask you, just try your best. Right? And so you're taking the test, and there are going to be times where you're just like, man, this is a really hard question, but I got to try my best. And you just go through and you try your best, and you're going to get some wrong. There's no doubt about it. But you know it'll be okay in the end. And that, you use some of the language of like sustaining. It's just joy sustains you, contentment, that idea of it being something that grounds you. I think joy is that way. It has a grounding element to it that anchors us. Happiness is more flitting. It's that in the moment, wow, this is fun. Happiness and fun, I think, are two words that often pair together. You can have fun, but the fun, it comes and goes. But joy is sustaining. And so as you look at those fiery ordeals and trials, that's the goal, is remember your grounding. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you've anchored your mindset so that those emotions will come and go. And when they're good, it's great. But you can't count on that. I mean, the saying, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed, it exists for a reason. Why am I upset today? Don't know. Apparently, I just woke up that way. You don't always have a lot of control over that. But you do have control over your mindset. What am I going to do about it? So yeah, I agree. I think joy is more of a mindset. That's a good way to think of it. And along those lines, remember that you're blessed. As you move on down, he says, if you're reviled for the name of Christ, you're blessed because the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. When the apostles stood before the Sanhedrin and they told them, don't preach in Jesus' name, and they said, we're going to do it anyways, and then they beat them. What did the apostles do when they left that meeting? Anybody remember? What? They preached the word, and it said they went on their way, rejoicing that they'd been counted worthy. So they understood that if I'm suffering for Christ, I've been given an opportunity that not everybody gets. And that's a powerful mindset, to go back to what you were saying. And when we suffer for the name of Christ, that's a blessing because you're getting to be a light. Your light is having an opportunity to shine. How many of us have thought, man, I just wish I had an opportunity to tell somebody about Christ, or I wish I knew the right thing to say, or to do something to let my light shine, and your struggle for how do I do that, every once in a while in life you get those moments. And a lot of times it comes with a bitter pill alongside it. And so if they revile you for their Christ, you're blessed. So remember that just because people feel a certain way about you doesn't mean God feels that way too, right? Just if your name's mud here on earth, but God thinks highly of you, the only one that matters thinks highly of you. And so we can keep that context to our life. And then the last one is, don't be ashamed. So verse 15, make sure that none of you suffers as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or a troublesome meddler, but if any of you suffers as a Christian, he is not to be ashamed, but is to glorify God in this name. So here, if you are serving God, there's no shame in that suffering. But that by implication means there is a type of suffering there is shame in. Which is what? What kind of suffering should bring shame? You break the law. Yeah, when you do the wrong thing. When you do something that's evil. Which we all do, right? So we don't want to confuse this with, well, whenever I go through something bad, no big deal. I'm blessed. No, if you did something wrong and it hurt a bunch of people or it caused some consequences of damage, you absolutely should feel shame for that. In fact, if a Christian didn't feel shame for that, that's not going to glorify God. But the goal is to feel that shame as rarely as possible, right? To instead say, no, I'm going to do the right thing and I'm going to suffer as a Christian. The interesting thing is, there's one thing that is never mentioned in this conversation. You can suffer for being an evildoer, you can suffer for being a Christian, but what's the thing that's never mentioned as an option? You can suffer or you can suffer, but does it ever say you cannot suffer? Is there an option C where there's no suffering? That's it, not this side, right? It's in heaven, but nowhere here. So choose your hard. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And James talks about that. You should grieve, you should mourn. Like that idea of your conscience should be pricked when you do the wrong thing. And absolutely, that's one of the goals of living as a Christian is to have a pure conscience. And those who live outside of Christ long enough, it talks about their conscience being seared. So that they just don't feel it anymore. So it is a gift. It's absolutely a gift from God, that sense of shame. But it does also get hijacked against us sometimes. If you are in a conversation with people and your belief system, following the scriptures, is the minority view, can you be shamed into being silent? It happens, doesn't it? That peer pressure to just remain silent, that's the devil hijacking a good thing, right? And we see that happen all the time. Satan has nothing that is his except lies. He hasn't invented anything but the lie. All he can do is take stuff God's made and twist it and pervert it. So God gives you shame so that you will feel bad when you do the wrong thing. And Satan says, we could tweak that a little bit and get you to feel bad when you're doing something that steps outside of the cultural norms, and peer pressure kicks in, and so you just say, I'll just be quiet about being a Christian. I won't mention Jesus' name. And that's what we're being warned against here is, don't be ashamed, but glorify God. So don't let that stuff hijack you. Okay, then the next thing that we got is down in verse 19. As we close out the chapter, therefore those also who suffer according to the will of God shall entrust their souls to a faithful Creator in doing what is right. We will close out class with that idea that what Peter is telling us is that when we suffer as righteous people, we're entrusting our souls to a faithful Creator. We're saying, God, here's my life. I'm giving it to you. You'll take better care of it than me. That's what suffering is doing. When we when we try and avoid suffering for godliness, what we're saying is, I would serve God as long as it doesn't hurt, right? We want to do the opposite. We want to say, God, here's my life. You direct it the way that you see fit. And that's the end of 1 Peter chapter 4. Anybody have any closing comments before we close up? Okay.